I found him standing inside my boathouse on a Tuesday morning. 7:15. Sun already warm on the water, coffee still sitting on my kitchen counter, and Greg Lassiter, president of the Willowbrook Cove Homeowners Association, was inside my private structure with a tape measure and a clipboard like he owned the place. I'd walked down to check on the boat. That's it. Nothing dramatic. Dana had asked me to make sure the cover was tied down properly because we'd had wind the night before. So I grabbed my phone, slipped on my shoes, and walked the gravel path along the side of the yard toward the dock. The boathouse door was open, not cracked, wide open. I stopped walking, listened, heard the scrape of shoes on concrete, the snap of a tape measure retracting. Someone was inside. Now my boathouse sits on my property, not near the property line, not in some grey area. 12 feet inside my lot line. Built 4 years ago with a proper survey, permits from the county, and every inspection signed off. I say this because it matters later. It matters a lot. I stepped through the doorway, and there he was. Greg Lassiter, wearing a tucked-in polo and khaki shorts, standing next to my boat like he was conducting some kind of official audit. He had a clipboard with a printed form on it. He had a small digital camera hanging from his wrist. And he had the posture of a man who believed completely, without question, that he had every right to be there. He looked up at me, not startled, not embarrassed, almost annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "Morning," he said, casual, like we'd bumped into each other at the mailbox. "What are you doing in here, Greg?" He clicked the tape measure and pulled it along the base of the far wall, wrote something on the clipboard. Then he turned to me with this expression, this patient, almost fatherly look, and said, "Just getting some measurements. Board meetings tonight. We need updated records on all non-conforming structures." Non-conforming. That word. He said it so smoothly, like it was a fact, like my boathouse, permitted, inspected, legal, was some kind of violation he was generously tolerating. "You're inside my property," I said, "inside my boathouse, without my permission." He smiled. Not a mean smile, worse, a smile that said he felt sorry for me, that I didn't understand how things worked around here. "The HOA has authority over common area adjacent structures," he said. "It's in the covenants, Section 9. You're welcome to review it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step toward him. I just pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the camera, and hit record. His smile didn't drop, but something behind his eyes shifted. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Getting my own records," I said. Greg stared at my phone for about 3 seconds. Then he did something I didn't expect. He shrugged. Just a small lift of the shoulders, like the camera didn't bother him at all. Like he'd been recorded before and it had never mattered. "Record whatever you want," he said. "This is an HOA compliance inspection, fully within our rights." He turned his back to me and kept measuring. Ran the tape along the interior wall, muttered a number, wrote it down. Then he crouched near the base of the boat lift and took a photo with his little digital camera, flash and everything. I stood in the doorway and kept filming. I didn't say anything else yet. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him to keep going, keep talking, keep acting like this was normal, because the more he did, the more I had. Let me tell you about Greg Lassiter. He'd been HOA president for 3 years. Before him, the board was mostly retired couples who sent polite reminder letters about trash can placement and holiday decoration timelines. Normal stuff. Annoying, sure, but harmless. Then Greg moved in, bought one of the bigger lots on the north side of the cove, ran for the board within 6 months, and became president within a year. Nobody ran against him. Nobody thought it mattered. It started small. New rules about fence heights, a revised parking policy that somehow only affected the homes on the south side, my side. Then came the architectural review requirements. Suddenly, you couldn't repaint your shutters without submitting a form, paying a $200 review fee, and waiting 30 days for approval. One neighbor got fined $1,500 for installing a flagpole without pre-authorization. A flagpole on his own property, with an American flag. But the thing about Greg was, he never yelled, never threatened. He spoke in this calm, measured tone, always referencing section numbers and covenant clauses, always smiling, always making it sound like he was doing you a favor by explaining the rules you were too dumb to understand. People complained privately. Nobody pushed back publicly. Because Greg had done something clever in his first year. He'd stacked the board, got 3 of his neighbors elected, people who owed him favors, people whose fence variances he'd quietly approved, people who understood that agreeing with Greg made life easier than fighting him. By the time I built my boathouse, Greg controlled the board 4-1. The lone dissenter was a woman named Patricia Owens, 72 years old, who'd lived in Willowbrook Cove since the development was built. Patricia voted no on everything Greg proposed. He ignored her every single time. So when Greg said non-conforming structure and referenced Section 9, I knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't a measurement trip. This was the setup. He was building a paper trail, and he was standing inside my boathouse to do it. I lowered my phone slightly. Not off, just less obvious. "Greg," I said, "how did you get in here?" He didn't look up from his clipboard. "Door was open," he said. "It wasn't. I knew the door wasn't open because I'd locked it myself the evening before. I lock it every evening. The boathouse has a deadbolt, not the original builder's lock, but one I installed after a neighbor's kayak went missing 2 summers ago. Single key. I have 1 copy. Dana has the other. There is no third, so either Greg Lassiter picked my lock, or he had a way in I didn't know about. I looked at the door frame. No damage, no scratches around the keyhole. The deadbolt was in the unlocked position, turned cleanly. Whoever opened it had used a key, or something close to one. I didn't push it, not right then. I filed it away and kept recording. "You about done?" I asked. Greg straightened up, tucked the clipboard under his arm, and gave me that patient look again. "Almost. I just need to get the exterior dimensions and photograph the roofline. I'll be out of your hair in 10 minutes. "You're out of my hair now," I said. "This is my property. You don't have permission to be here, and you don't have permission to measure anything." He tilted his head. "I understand your frustration, but the covenants are clear. Any structure within the community boundary is subject to review. I'm not trying to cause problems here. I'm trying to prevent them." That line, "I'm trying to prevent them," was pure Greg. Every threat he ever made was wrapped in helpfulness. Every violation letter started with, "We want to work with you." Every fine came with a paragraph about community standards and mutual respect. The man could bulldoze your property rights with a smile and make you feel like you were the unreasonable one. "I'd like you to leave," I said. Simple, clear. He held up one hand. "I'll be out of here in 5 minutes. Let me just finish." "Now, Greg." Something shifted in the air. He looked at me, really looked for the first time since I'd walked in. He was sizing me up, deciding whether I was the type to cause a scene or the type to send an angry email and let it go. Most people in Willowbrook Cove were the second type. That's what he was counting on. "All right," he said. He tucked his pen into his shirt pocket, looped the camera strap tighter around his wrist, and walked past me toward the door. Close enough that his shoulder almost brushed mine. Not accidental. At the doorway, he stopped and turned back. "There's going to be a vote tonight," he said, "at the board meeting, regarding non-conforming waterfront structures. I'd encourage you to attend." "I'll be there," I said. He nodded, smiled again. Then he walked up the gravel path toward the road, clipboard swinging loosely at his side, like a man who'd already won whatever game he was playing. I stood in my boathouse for a long time after he left. I replayed the whole encounter in my head. The tape measure, the clipboard, the camera, the calm, the key. Then I called Patricia Owens. Patricia picked up on the second ring. She was the kind of woman who always answered her phone, always had coffee ready, and always knew more than she let on. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. That caught me off guard. "You know what's happening? Honey, I've been on this board for 11 years. I know what's happening before Greg knows what's happening. Come over. Bring your paperwork." I went back inside, told Dana what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was angry. Dana doesn't get loud when she's upset. She gets still. She asked me one question. "He was inside the boathouse?" standing next to the boat. She set her coffee mug down very carefully. "Go see Patricia. I'll pull the permits from the filing cabinet." 20 minutes later, I was sitting at Patricia's kitchen table with a glass of iced tea I hadn't asked for and a folder of documents I didn't know existed. Patricia had copies of every board meeting agenda and minutes going back 7 years. She kept them in labeled manila folders, organized by date, stored in a filing cabinet in her spare bedroom. When I asked her why, she said, "Because men like Greg count on nobody keeping records." She opened a folder dated 3 months ago. Inside was a single-page memo, internal, board members only, titled Waterfront Structure Compliance Review. It outlined a proposal to reclassify all privately built waterfront structures as community adjacent and subject them to HOA oversight, maintenance standards, and annual inspection fees. Annual inspection fees. "He's been planning this for 3 months, I said. "Longer," Patricia said. She pulled another folder. 6 months ago, a different memo. This one was about updating the community's master covenant to include language about shared waterfront access zones. The proposed amendment would give the HOA authority over any structure within 50 feet of the lake shoreline, including private ones. My boathouse was 32 feet from the shoreline. "This didn't go to a vote," I said, scanning the document. "No, he tabled it, said he needed more data, more measurements." She looked at me over her glasses. "Now you know what he was measuring this morning." I sat back in my chair. The picture was coming together. Greg wasn't just harassing me. He was building a legal framework, or what he wanted to look like a legal framework, to take control of lakefront properties. Mine was the test case. If he could reclassify my boathouse, he could do it to every waterfront structure in the community. "How many homes does this affect?" I asked. 14, Patricia said. "Every lot on the south and east sides with lake access. Greg's lot is on the north side. His property wouldn't fall within the zone." "Of course it wouldn't." "What's his angle?" I asked. "Fees? Control?" Patricia closed the folder and looked at me. "Both," she said, "and something else. But you're not ready for that part yet." I didn't push Patricia on what she meant. I'd known her long enough to understand that she shared information on her own schedule. Pressing her would only slow things down. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I drove home, spread everything out on the dining table, and started building my own file. Dana had already pulled the permits. Building permit, county survey, inspection sign-offs, the lot plat with measurements, everything clean, everything legal. I added the video from that morning and saved a backup to my laptop. Then I sat down and read Section 9 of the Willowbrook Cove Covenants. All of it. Every word. It took about 40 minutes. The language was dense, full of cross-references and defined terms that looped back on each other. But I found what I was looking for, and what I was looking for was what wasn't there. Section 9 covered common area maintenance and shared amenities. It defined common areas as pools, parks, walking paths, and the community dock. It gave the HOA authority to inspect, maintain, and regulate those spaces, standard stuff. But here's what Section 9 did not say. It did not mention private structures, not once. There was no clause about community-adjacent buildings, no reference to a 50-foot shoreline buffer, no provision for reclassifying private property under HOA jurisdiction. Greg's entire argument was built on language that didn't exist, which meant he needed to create that language. That's what the vote tonight was about, not enforcing existing rules, rewriting them. I called my neighbor, Tom Burgess, 3 lots down. Tom had a dock and a small storage shed near the water. He'd be affected too. "You going to the meeting tonight?" I asked. "Wasn't planning on it." "Why?" I told him. Kept it short. Greg in my boathouse, the memos, the proposed reclassification, the inspection fees. Tom was quiet for a long moment. He was inside your boathouse. Everyone kept landing on that detail, because everyone understood what it meant. It wasn't just rude. It wasn't just overreach. It was a man walking into your private property uninvited and acting like he had authority. And if nobody stopped him, that act became the authority. "I'll be there," Tom said. "I'll call Dave and Karen too." By noon, I had 6 homeowners confirmed for the meeting. Not a coalition, not a revolt, just 6 people who'd read the covenants and didn't like what Greg was trying to do. I spent the afternoon preparing. I printed copies of Section 9 with the relevant paragraphs highlighted. I printed the county permits for my boathouse. I printed a screenshot of the video, Greg standing inside, tape measure in hand, clipboard visible. Dana watched me stack the folders and said, "You're not just going to argue with him, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm going to let him talk first." She almost smiled. "Good." The board meeting started at 7. Community clubhouse, same as always. Folding chairs arranged in rows, a long table at the front for the board members, a projector nobody ever used, and a sign-in sheet by the door that Greg insisted everyone fill out. He liked knowing who showed up. I signed in. So did Dana, so did Tom, Dave, Karen, and 3 others I hadn't called. Word had spread on its own. The room had about 30 people, which was unusual. Most meetings drew 8 or 10. Greg noticed the crowd. I watched him scan the room as he arranged his papers at the front table. He didn't look concerned. He looked pleased. A big audience for his big moment. The 4 board members took their seats. Greg in the center, flanked by his allies, Steve Markham, Bill Coates, and Denise Fowler. Patricia sat at the far end, slightly apart, like she always did. She had her own folder in front of her. She caught my eye once and looked away. Greg opened the meeting with the usual formalities. Minutes from last month, Treasurer's report, a brief update on the pool resurfacing project. All routine, all designed to make what came next feel like just another agenda item. Then he got to it. "Next item," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Waterfront structure compliance. As many of you know, the board has been reviewing the status of privately built structures near the lake shoreline. Our goal is to ensure that all structures within the community meet current safety and aesthetic standards." Safety and aesthetic standards. That was new language. He was framing it as a protection issue. Smart. He pulled out a printed handout and passed stacks down each row. I took one. It was a 2-page proposal titled Waterfront Overlay Zone, Community Standard Amendment. Clean formatting. Professional language. It looked like something a lawyer had drafted, though I doubted one had. The proposal defined a waterfront overlay zone extending 50 feet from the lake shoreline. Any structure within that zone, regardless of ownership, would be subject to annual HOA inspection, compliance review, and a $400 per year maintenance assessment fee. $400 a year for a structure I built on my own land, with my own money. Greg read through the highlights. He used words like community character and shared responsibility and proactive maintenance. He talked about liability concerns. He mentioned insurance. He made it sound reasonable, measured, inevitable. I looked around the room. A few people were nodding. Not enthusiastically, more like the tired nod of people who assumed the board knew best and didn't want to make a fuss. Then Greg said, "I'll open the floor for comments before we move to a vote." He said it the way people say it when they don't actually want comments. Quick, already reaching for the next page in his folder. I stood up. I didn't rush. I stood up, let the chair scrape the floor behind me, and waited until the room was quiet. Greg looked at me with that practiced patience. The expression that said, "Go ahead, I'll correct whatever you say when you're done." "I have a few questions about the proposal," I said. Conversational. "Before any vote happens." Greg gestured with an open hand. "Of course, that's what the comment period is for." I held up the handout. "This defines a waterfront overlay zone of 50 feet from the shoreline. Can you point me to the section of the existing covenants that authorizes the board to create overlay zones on private property?" Silence. Not dramatic silence. Just the kind of quiet that happens when someone asks a question nobody expected. Greg didn't miss a beat. "This is an amendment proposal. That's why we're voting on it, to add this authority to the covenants." "Right," I said. "So currently the HOA has no authority over privately built structures on private lots, correct?" He shifted in his chair. The covenants give the board broad authority over community standards. Section 9. Section 9 covers common areas, I said. Pools, parks, walking paths, and the community dock. I read it this morning. All of it. There's no mention of private structures, no reference to shoreline buffers, no provision for overlay zones. I held up my printed copy, highlighted, tabbed. I have it here, if anyone wants to see it. A few heads turned. Tom was watching from the third row. Karen had her arms crossed. Greg leaned forward. The covenants also grant the board authority to interpret and enforce community standards as needed. That's Section 3, paragraph. Section 3 gives the board authority to enforce existing rules, I said, not to create new jurisdictions over private property. Those are two very different things, Greg. He smiled. Still patient, still controlled, but the rhythm had changed. He was responding to me now, instead of leading the room. I appreciate your reading, he said, but this is a complex legal area. The board has consulted on this, and we're confident the amendment is within our authority to propose. Who did you consult? The question hung in the air. Greg blinked once. We've had discussions with our community management liaison, he said. Not a lawyer? The management company has legal resources available, but no attorney has reviewed this specific proposal? He paused. Just half a second. The board is satisfied with the guidance we've received. I nodded. Didn't press harder. Didn't need to. The room had heard enough. The people who'd been nodding along had stopped nodding. I sat down. Patricia cleared her throat at the end of the table. She opened her folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and placed it flat in front of her. I have something to add, she said. Greg's jaw tightened, just barely, but I saw it. Patricia didn't stand. She didn't need to. When a 72-year-old woman who's been on the board longer than anyone in the room starts talking, people listen. Even Greg. I want to make sure the homeowners in this room understand what's actually being proposed tonight, she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, just clear. This amendment doesn't just allow the board to inspect waterfront structures. It creates a new classification of property. A zone where the HOA assumes authority that currently belongs to the individual homeowner. Once that authority is transferred, it doesn't come back. Steve Markham shifted in his seat. Bill Coates studied his fingernails. I also want to note, Patricia continued, that this proposal affects 14 lots, all on the south and east sides of the community. The north side, where 3 of our 4 board majority members live, has no lake-adjacent structures that would fall within the proposed zone. She let that sit. She didn't editorialize, didn't say it was unfair or corrupt. She just stated it as a fact, and let the room do the math. A woman in the back row, I didn't know her name, raised her hand. So we'd be paying $400 a year for the board to inspect something we own, on our own property. Greg jumped in. The assessment covers maintenance oversight, liability review, but it's my shed, the woman said. I built it. I maintain it. What exactly is the HOA overseeing? Another voice from the left side of the room. Dave. And who does the inspections? The board or a licensed inspector? Greg's smile was thinner now. The board would coordinate inspections as part of our standard compliance process. So you, Dave said. You'd be walking onto our properties to inspect our stuff. The board, not me personally. You were in my neighbor's boathouse this morning, Greg. 7 a.m., without permission. The room went still. That was the moment. Not because Dave said anything explosive, but because the idea, Greg physically inside someone's private structure, landed differently when 30 people heard it at once. It stopped being an argument about covenants and became something everyone could picture. A man in your space, touching your things, writing notes on a clipboard about property he doesn't own. Greg's posture changed. He sat up straighter. The warmth left his voice. I conducted a preliminary measurement visit this morning to prepare documentation for tonight's meeting, he said. That is well within the board's responsibilities. Not according to the covenants you keep citing, I said from my seat. Didn't stand this time. Didn't need to. Greg looked at me, then at the room, then at Steve, who offered nothing. Bill, who was still examining his hands, Denise, who was staring at the table. "I think we should table this vote," Patricia said, "until the full proposal has been reviewed by an independent attorney at the HOA's expense." Greg opened his mouth. "I second that motion," said Karen from the second row. "Here's the thing about Robert's Rules of Order. Most HOA boards barely follow them. They use just enough procedure to look official, motions, seconds, votes, without actually understanding the mechanics. Greg was no different. He ran meetings like a man who'd watched a few YouTube videos on parliamentary procedure and figured that was enough. But Patricia had served on a municipal planning commission before she retired. She knew the rules better than anyone in that room, and when she made a motion to table and Karen seconded it, Greg was stuck. He couldn't ignore it. A tabled motion with a second requires a vote, and a vote to table only needs a simple majority of the room, not just the board, if the meeting is conducted under the community's standard bylaws, which, as Patricia had reminded everyone at a meeting 2 years ago, Willowbrook Coves were. Greg knew this. I could see him calculating. "All in favor of tabling the waterfront overlay proposal pending independent legal review," Patricia said. Hands went up. Not all of them, but enough. I counted. Tom, Dave, Karen, the woman with the shed, Dana, me, 6, 7, 8 others I didn't know well but who'd been listening closely for the past 15 minutes. Greg counted too. His eyes moved across the room, row by row. "All opposed," he said. Steve raised his hand. Bill raised his. Denise hesitated, then raised hers. Greg raised his own last. 4. "Motion carries," Patricia said. She wrote something in her folder. "The proposal is tabled." Greg gathered his papers slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants everyone to see how calm he is. He moved to the next agenda item, a landscaping contract renewal, and pushed through the rest of the meeting in 12 minutes flat. No discussion, no comments, just motions and votes, rapid fire, his 3 allies raising hands in unison like they'd rehearsed it. The meeting ended at 7:48, shortest one in years. People filed out. A few came up to me in the parking lot. Handshakes, quiet words, "Thanks for speaking up." I had no idea he was doing that. "Let me know if you need anything." The kind of support that shows up after the hard part is already over. Tom walked with me to my car. "He's not going to let this go," he said. "I know. What's your next move?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I hadn't fully decided yet. I'd won the evening. The vote was tabled. The room was on my side. That should have been enough. But there was still the matter of the lock. Greg had been inside my boathouse. The door had been locked the night before, and he'd opened it without force. That wasn't an HOA overreach problem. That was a breaking and entering problem, and I hadn't decided yet how far I was willing to take it. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was angry. I'd moved past angry somewhere around the 3rd paragraph of the waterfront overlay proposal. What kept me up was the lock. I went out to the boathouse the next morning, early again, but this time on purpose. I brought a flashlight and a magnifying glass, Dana's, from her cross-stitch kit. I felt slightly ridiculous, but I needed to see. The deadbolt was a standard Schlag, nothing fancy, but solid. Single cylinder, keyed on the outside, thumb turn on the inside. I examined the keyhole closely. No scratches, no tool marks, no signs of picking. The strike plate was flush. The frame was undamaged. I locked the deadbolt, walked outside, and tried every method I could think of. Credit card on the latch. Didn't work. Deadbolt was engaged. Bumping the door with my shoulder. Solid. No give. I even tried a screwdriver in the keyhole, just to see if the cylinder was loose. It wasn't. Whoever opened that door had used a key. A real key. I went inside and called a locksmith. Guy named Ray, local shop, had done work for me before. I told him I needed the boathouse rekeyed and asked him something I'd never asked a locksmith before. Is there any way someone could get a copy of my key without having the original? Ray was quiet for a second. Depends, what kind of lock? I told him. Those use a standard keyway, he said. SC1. Very common. If someone had access to the key for even a few minutes, say from a key hook, a drawer, a realtor's lockbox, they could make a copy at any hardware store. Takes about 90 seconds. A realtor's lockbox. I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table. My mind was moving fast now, pulling threads I hadn't connected before. When we bought our house 6 years ago, the sale went through a local realty group. Standard process, they installed a lockbox on the front door during showings. But the Boathouse wasn't built yet then. No lockbox there. Except, I pulled out my laptop and went through my email archive. It took about 20 minutes of searching, but I found it. 4 years ago, when the Boathouse was finished, my insurance company had required an independent appraisal before adding the structure to our policy. The appraiser needed access, so I'd given a key to the realty office to hold temporarily. Just for the day. I'd picked up the key that evening. 1 key out, 1 key back. Simple. But the realty office that handled it, Lakeview Properties, was the same company that managed 3 rental homes in Willowbrook Cove. And the broker who ran that office was a man named Phil Decatur. Phil Decatur, who sat next to Greg Lassiter at every 4th of July barbecue. Phil Decatur, who'd been on the HOA's Architectural Review Subcommittee until last year. I didn't call Phil. Not yet. I needed more before I made that connection out loud. Right now it was a theory. A strong one, but still a theory. Greg in my Boathouse plus Phil's access to my key equaled a reasonable suspicion, not proof. So I did something else instead. I went back to my camera system. When I'd installed the motion sensor cameras 2 years ago, I'd set them to record on a rolling 7-day loop. After 7 days, the oldest footage gets overwritten. Standard stuff for a home system. But there's also a cloud backup feature I'd turned on and mostly forgotten about, a 30-day archive that saves any clip triggered by motion detection. I sat at my desk and logged into the archive, searched the Boathouse camera. The last 30 days of motion alerts loaded as a list of time-stamped thumbnails. Most of them were nothing. Birds landing on the dock railing, a neighbor's dog wandering past, wind moving the tarp on the boat. Then I found it. 11 days ago, a Saturday, 6:14 a.m., a figure walking down the gravel path toward my Boathouse. I clicked the clip and watched. It was Greg. Same polo, same khaki shorts. He walked to the Boathouse door, produced a key from his pocket, unlocked the deadbolt, and went inside. He was in there for about 8 minutes, came out carrying nothing, locked the door behind him, and walked back toward the road. 8 minutes. Inside my Boathouse. 11 days before the board meeting. I kept scrolling. 3 weeks ago. Another clip. 6:22 a.m. Greg again. Same routine. Key, door, inside, 8 minutes, out, lock, gone. My hands were steady, but my jaw was tight. I checked again. Found a third visit, 26 days ago. Same pattern. Always early morning. Always alone. Always with a key he should not have had. 3 unauthorized entries into my private property. All recorded. All time-stamped. All saved. I downloaded every clip to my laptop. Then I copied them to a USB drive. Then I emailed them to myself with a date-stamped subject line. 3 copies. 3 locations. I wasn't going to lose this. Dana came into the office and saw my face. She didn't ask what I'd found. She just looked at the screen, watched one of the clips play, and said, "How many times?" "At least 3. Probably more before the 30-day window." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing I'd been thinking but hadn't said out loud yet. "That's not an HOA issue anymore." I closed the laptop. I'm going to find out what he was doing in there for 8 minutes. I went back to the Boathouse that afternoon. This time I wasn't checking the lock. I was looking at the space the way Greg had been looking at it, like someone studying a room for a purpose. The Boathouse isn't large, about 20 by 16 feet. Concrete floor, wood frame walls, corrugated metal roof. The boat sits on a hydraulic lift in the center bay, which takes up most of the space. Along the left wall, I've got a workbench with tools, some fishing gear, a couple of storage bins. Along the right wall, a shelf unit with life jackets, rope, cleaning supplies, nothing valuable, nothing worth breaking in for. I stood where Greg had been standing when I caught him, near the far wall. I'd seen him measuring that wall specifically, running the tape along the base, writing numbers down. Why that wall? I walked over. The far wall faces the lake. It's the back of the structure, built on a slight slope that drops toward the water. From the outside, you can see the wall meets a concrete foundation pad that extends about 2 feet beyond the structure. A drainage apron the contractor added to manage runoff. I crouched down and looked at the base of the wall from the inside. Nothing unusual. Concrete meets wood framing, standard construction. Then I went outside and looked at the same wall from the lakeside, and I saw it. The drainage apron, the concrete pad, extended further than I remembered. Not 2 feet, more like 4. And at the far edge, where the concrete met the natural shoreline, there were survey stakes. Orange-topped wooden stakes driven into the ground, fresh ones. The wood was clean, not weathered. Someone had surveyed this area recently, and it wasn't me. I pulled one of the stakes out of the ground. On the side, written in black marker, was a series of numbers, a lot reference. And below that, 3 letters, LVP, Lakeview Properties, Phil Decatur's company. I stood there, holding the stake, staring at the lake. The pieces were connecting faster now. Greg wasn't just trying to regulate my boathouse. He wasn't just trying to impose fees. He was getting it surveyed, independently, through Phil's company, without my knowledge, without my consent. But why? I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. I need to ask you something, I said. You told me Greg's angle was fees, control, and something else. Something I wasn't ready for. She was quiet for a moment. Are you near a computer? She asked. I can be. Look up the County Planning Commission's agenda for next month. There's a hearing scheduled. Item 14. Read it, and then call me back. She hung up. Patricia never said goodbye on the phone. She just stopped talking and ended the call. I went inside, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county website. Item 14. I read it twice. Then I called her back. Item 14 on the County Planning Commission agenda was a rezoning application, a request to reclassify a strip of lakefront land roughly 12 feet wide and running along the entire south and east shoreline of Willowbrook Cove, from residential to mixed-use recreational. The applicant was listed as Willowbrook Cove HOA, represented by Lakeview Properties LLC, Greg and Phil, together, on paper. The application described the strip as underutilized community-adjacent waterfront and proposed its conversion into a shared recreational access corridor, a fancy way of saying a public access path along the lake. The filing included a preliminary site plan showing a walking trail, 2 kayak launch points, and a small observation deck. It also included a map, and on that map, my boathouse was marked with a dotted line and a single word, remove. I stared at that word for a long time. Now everything made sense. The overlay zone proposal, the inspection fees, the reclassification language. It was never about compliance or community standards. It was a land grab, slow, methodical, and disguised as governance. Here's how it worked. Step 1. Pass the overlay zone amendment, giving the HOA authority over waterfront structures. Step 2. Inspect those structures and find violations, real or invented. Step 3. Use those violations to pressure homeowners into tearing down or surrendering their structures. Step 4. File the rezoning application with the county, showing a clean shoreline ready for development. Step 5. Build the recreational corridor, funded by HOA assessments, managed by who else? Lakeview Properties. Greg gets control. Phil gets the management contract. The 14 homeowners on the south and east sides lose their private waterfront access, and the 3 board members on the north side, their property values go up because now the community has a public lakefront amenity paid for by people on the other side of the development. I called Patricia back. How long have you known about this? I asked. I saw the Planning Commission filing 2 weeks ago, she said. I check the county website every Monday, have for years. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you needed to see Greg in your boathouse first. You needed to feel it. If I'd come to you with a county filing and a theory, you would have written an email to the board and moved on. Now you won't." She was right. I hated that she was right. "What do I do with this?" I asked. "You do what Greg doesn't expect," she said. "You go above him. The county. The sheriff," she said. "Greg entered your property without permission, multiple times, on camera. That's not an HOA dispute. That's trespassing. File the report, get it on record, then we deal with the rezoning." I hung up and sat in my kitchen for 10 minutes, alone, thinking. Then I drove to the county sheriff's office. The sheriff's office was a flat brick building on the county road, about 15 minutes from Willowbrook Cove. I'd driven past it 100 times, never been inside. The deputy at the front desk was a woman named Morales. Young, professional, no nonsense. She asked me what I needed, and I told her I wanted to file a trespassing complaint. She handed me a form and pointed to a row of plastic chairs. I didn't sit. I filled out the form standing up. Name, address, description of the property, description of the incidents. When I got to the section that asked for evidence, I wrote, "Video recordings from private security cameras, 3 separate entries over a 30-day period, all time-stamped." Morales took the form, read it, and looked up at me. "You have the videos with you?" I handed her the USB drive. She plugged it into a desk computer and watched the first clip, then the second, then the third. Her expression didn't change, but she picked up her desk phone and made a short call. 5 minutes later, a man came out from the back, Sergeant Briggs, older, grey around the temples, the kind of calm that comes from having heard every version of every story. He shook my hand, led me to a small office, and asked me to walk him through everything from the beginning. I told him, all of it. The morning I found Greg. The open door, the locked deadbolt, the board meeting, the table vote, the survey stakes, the rezoning application. I laid it out the way I'd been building it in my head, not emotional, not editorialized, just the sequence, the facts, the evidence. Briggs listened without interrupting. He took notes in a small notebook with a pen that looked like it had survived 20 years of use. When I finished, he asked one question. "Did you ever give this individual permission to enter your boathouse?" "No." "Did you give anyone else permission to provide access?" "No." He nodded, closed his notebook. "The videos are clear," he said. "Same individual, same location, multiple occasions. You've got a deadbolt lock and no signs of forced entry, which means he either had a key or circumvented the lock. Either way, entering a locked private structure without the owner's permission meets the threshold for criminal trespass under state statute." He paused. "I'm going to assign a case number and have a deputy visit Mr. Lassiter to inform him of the complaint. That's the first step. If he cooperates, we may handle it with a warning and a no trespass order. If he doesn't," he shrugged, "we escalate." "What does escalation look like?" "A citation, possibly an arrest warrant if he violates the no trespass order." I thanked him. He walked me out. At the door he stopped. "One more thing. The key situation, if someone duplicated your key without authorization, that's a separate issue, worth following up on." "I plan to," I said. The deputy visited Greg the next afternoon. I know because Tom called me 20 minutes after it happened. Tom's lot has a clear view of Greg's driveway, and he'd watched a county sheriff's cruiser pull up, a uniformed deputy walk to the front door, and Greg step outside with the expression of a man who'd just been told his credit card was declined at a restaurant he owned. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. The deputy handed Greg a document, the no trespass order, and left. Greg stood on his porch for a while after, didn't go inside, just stood there, holding the paper, staring at nothing. Tom said he'd never seen Greg look like that before. I expected a reaction, a phone call, an email, maybe a knock on my door with some carefully rehearsed speech about misunderstandings and community cooperation. That was Greg's style. Smooth things over, reframe the narrative, make himself the reasonable one. But nothing came. Not that day. Not the next. The silence was worse. On the third day, I got a letter in my mailbox, not from Greg, from the Willowbrook Cove HOA printed on official letterhead, signed by Steve Markham as Vice President. The letter informed me that a special compliance review had been initiated regarding my boathouse. It cited potential violations of community aesthetic standards, structural setback requirements, and environmental impact guidelines. It requested that I provide full documentation, permits, surveys, contractor records, insurance certificates within 14 business days for a structure that had been standing for 4 years without a single complaint. The letter didn't mention Greg. It didn't mention the trespassing complaint. It didn't mention the board meeting or the tabled vote. It was written as if none of that had happened, as if this were a routine administrative matter, totally unrelated to everything else. That was the move. Greg couldn't come at me directly anymore. The no trespass order made sure of that. So he sent Steve. Same machine, different face. I showed the letter to Dana. She read it slowly, then set it on the counter. Retaliation, she said, clearly. Can they do this? They can request documentation. That part's probably within their authority. But the timing makes it obvious. 3 days after a trespassing complaint, they suddenly need my permits. Any judge would see through that. I photographed the letter, front and back, and emailed it to myself with the date. Then I added it to my file. The file was getting thick now. Video clips, meeting minutes, covenant printouts, survey stakes, the rezoning application, and now a retaliation letter. I called Patricia that evening. They sent me a compliance review notice, I said. I know, she said. They sent me one too. That stopped me. You, for what? My garden shed, the one that's been in my backyard for 9 years, she paused. They're going after everyone who spoke up at that meeting. I made calls that night. Tom had received a letter about his dock, a structural safety concern that had never been raised before. Dave got one about his fence height. Karen got one about an exterior paint color that had been approved by the previous board 6 years ago. Every single person who'd spoken up at the meeting or voted to table the proposal had received a compliance notice within the same 3-day window. Every one. The people who'd stayed quiet. Nothing. It was so blatant it was almost insulting. Greg wasn't even trying to hide the pattern. Or maybe he didn't care. Maybe he believed that the threat of fines and legal headaches would be enough to make people fold. That eventually the cost of fighting would outweigh the cost of complying. And for most people, most of the time, he'd be right. But not this time. I drafted an email, sent it to every homeowner who'd received a notice, kept it short, no legal arguments, no emotional language, just the facts. 7 homeowners received compliance notices within 3 days of voting to table the waterfront overlay proposal. No homeowner who voted with the board majority received a notice. I have filed a trespassing complaint against the HOA President, which is now on record with the County Sheriff's Office. If you believe your notice is retaliatory, I'd encourage you to document it and respond in writing. We should also discuss whether independent legal counsel is warranted. I'm not a lawyer, but I know when a pattern isn't a coincidence. I got responses within the hour, every single one. Tom, I'm in, whatever it takes. Karen, I've already called an attorney. She does HOA disputes. She's interested. Dave, tell me where to show up. Patricia didn't respond to the email. She called me instead. Karen's attorney, she said. Her name is Claire Whitfield. She's handled 4 HOA cases in this county. 1-3. The 4th settled. I've already spoken to her. Of course, Patricia had already spoken to her. Claire says the retaliation pattern is strong. Patricia continued. 7 targeted notices, all within the same window, all directed at homeowners who opposed the board's proposal. Combined with the trespassing evidence, she thinks we have enough to file a formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory office. What does that do? It triggers an independent review of the board's actions. If the state finds cause, they can order a supervised election, freeze the board's authority, even dissolve it in extreme cases. I let that sink in. There's one more thing, Patricia said. Claire wants to know about the rezoning application. If Greg filed it on behalf of the HOA without a proper board vote authorizing it, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. And I checked the minutes. There was no vote. No vote. He just did it. Claire Whitfield came to Willowbrook Cove on a Thursday. She met with 7 of us at Patricia's house, the same kitchen table, the same iced tea, but now with a lawyer sitting at the head. Claire was in her 50s. Short hair, reading glasses on a chain, a leather bag that looked like it had been to 100 courtrooms. She didn't make small talk. She opened a legal pad and asked each of us to walk through our experience, one at a time, no interruptions. It took 2 hours. She filled 11 pages. When we finished, she closed the pad and laid it flat on the table. "Here's what you have," she said. "A board president who entered private property without authorization, on camera, multiple times. A retaliatory compliance campaign targeting homeowners who exercised their right to participate in a board meeting, and a rezoning application filed with the county in the HOA's name without board authorization." She paused. "Any one of those is a problem. Together, they're a pattern of abuse of authority. I can file a complaint with the state regulatory office this week. I can also send a demand letter to the board requiring them to withdraw the rezoning application, rescind the compliance notices, and call a special election." "What if they ignore it?" Tom asked. "Then we file in circuit court. Injunction to freeze board actions pending investigation. Given the trespassing report already on file, I'd expect a judge to grant it." The room was quiet. Not nervous quiet. The quiet of people realizing that the thing they'd been afraid to fight was actually fightable. Karen asked about cost. Claire gave a number. It wasn't small, but split 7 ways it was manageable. She also mentioned that in HOA disputes where the board is found to have acted in bad faith, the court can order the HOA to pay the homeowner's legal fees. "Greg's been using the HOA's money to fund his own agenda," Claire said. "Every homeowner in this community has been paying dues that subsidized his rezoning scheme. That's a fiduciary breach. The court takes that seriously. We voted right there at Patricia's kitchen table. Not a formal vote, just a show of hands, all 7 up." Claire sent the demand letter the next morning. Certified mail to each board member individually and to the HOA's registered address. 14 pages. Every incident documented. Every violation cited, every demand clearly stated. Withdraw the rezoning application, rescind the compliance notices, schedule a special election within 60 days, provide a full accounting of HOA funds used for the rezoning effort. Response deadline, 10 business days. I went home that afternoon and checked my Boathouse camera. Habit by now. The gravel path was empty, the door was locked, nothing moved except the water. For the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. Greg responded on day 9. Not to Claire, not to us, to the entire community. He sent a mass email, every homeowner in Willowbrook Cove, with the subject line, "Protecting our community from internal division." I read it standing at my kitchen counter with my morning coffee going cold. It was masterful in a way. 3 paragraphs of calm, concerned language about a small group of residents who were threatening the stability of our community through frivolous legal action. He didn't name anyone. He didn't have to. He positioned himself as the defender, the steady hand, the man who'd given years of service to this community only to be attacked by people who didn't understand what he'd sacrificed. He mentioned the Boathouse exactly once. He called it a routine inspection visit that had been mischaracterized by a homeowner with a personal grievance. He made no mention of the rezoning application, no mention of Phil DeCarter, no mention of Lakeview Properties, no mention of the survey stakes on my shoreline or the County Planning Commission filing. He ended with a call for unity, asked homeowners to attend the next board meeting and show support for responsible leadership. It almost worked. I got 2 calls that morning from neighbors I'd never spoken to. One asked if it was true that I was suing the HOA. The other asked if I was the one causing problems. Not angry, confused. They'd read Greg's email and heard only his side because his side was the only one they'd been given. I wanted to respond, wanted to send my own email with every document, every video, every filing, lay it all out and let the community decide. Claire told me not to. "Don't play his game," she said over the phone. "He wants a public argument. He wants neighbors choosing sides. That's where he's comfortable, managing perception. We're not in the perception business, we're in the evidence business. She was right, but it was hard. Watching someone reshape the truth in real time and staying quiet takes a discipline I didn't know I had. Claire sent a second letter to the board on day 10. This one was shorter, 2 pages. It noted that the demand letter's deadline had passed without compliance. It stated that a formal complaint was being filed with the state HOA Regulatory Office the following Monday, and it included one new piece of information. A records request had revealed that the HOA had paid Lakeview Properties $8,400 over the past 18 months for consulting services. The payments were authorized by Greg alone, no board vote, no line item in the annual budget shared with homeowners, just checks signed by the president, made out to his friend's company for work that benefited a rezoning scheme nobody had approved, $8,400 of our money. The state regulatory office moved faster than I expected. Claire filed the complaint on Monday. By Wednesday, we received confirmation that an investigator had been assigned. By the following week, the investigator had requested all board meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence from the past 2 years. Greg hired a lawyer, a real one this time, not Phil Decatur's management company connections, but an actual attorney from a firm 2 counties over. The lawyer sent a letter to Claire requesting a good faith pause on all legal proceedings while the board conducted an internal review. Claire's response was 1 paragraph. She declined. Things moved quickly after that, not dramatically, not with shouting matches or confrontations in driveways. It was all paper, letters, filings, records requests. The slow, grinding machinery of accountability that works not because it's powerful, but because it's patient. The County Planning Commission reviewed the rezoning application and found that it lacked a required authorization resolution from the HOA board. Without a documented board vote approving the filing, the application was procedurally deficient. They sent a notice to Lakeview Properties requesting the missing documentation within 30 days. Phil Decatur never responded. The application was withdrawn. The state investigator completed the preliminary review 3 weeks later. The findings were straightforward. The HOA board had issued compliance notices selectively, targeting homeowners based on their voting activity at a public meeting. The board president had authorized payments to an outside company without proper board approval or financial disclosure, and a rezoning application had been filed in the HOA's name without authorization. The investigator recommended a supervised special election within 45 days. The board was ordered to suspend all compliance actions pending the election. Greg's authority to sign checks or authorize expenditures on behalf of the HOA was frozen immediately. Steve Markham resigned from the board the day the order came down. Didn't send an email, didn't make a statement, just stopped showing up. Bill Coates followed 2 days later. Denise Fowler called Patricia directly and said she was sorry. Patricia thanked her and said nothing else. Greg didn't resign. I'll give him that. He held on until the special election, held on a Saturday morning in the same clubhouse where he'd tried to push through the overlay zone. 62 homeowners voted, the highest turnout in the community's history. Greg received 11 votes. Patricia was elected president. Tom and Karen joined the board. A woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who'd lived in the community for 8 years and never attended a single meeting before the compliance letters went out, won the 4th seat. Greg stood in the back of the room during the count. When the results were announced, he picked up his jacket and walked out without a word. Nobody followed him. The sheriff's office followed up on the trespassing complaint about a month after the election. Sergeant Briggs called me personally. Greg had been issued a citation, misdemeanor criminal trespass. He could contest it in court or accept a plea. He accepted the plea. A fine, community service, and a permanent no trespass order covering my property and my boathouse. The key question got answered too, though not the way I expected. It wasn't Phil Decatur who copied my key. It was Greg himself. During the appraisal 4 years ago, the realty office had logged the key in and out, using a sign-out sheet. Claire subpoenaed that sheet during the financial records review. Greg's name was on it. He'd signed the key out the same afternoon as the appraiser, 40 minutes after I'd dropped it off. Signed it back in 20 minutes later. Plenty of time to walk to the hardware store 2 blocks away. He'd been planning this for 4 years, maybe not all of it. Maybe not the rezoning or the overlay zone, but the key, the access, the idea that he could walk into my property whenever he wanted. That started the day my boathouse was built. I think about that sometimes. A man standing in a realty office, holding someone else's key, deciding to make a copy, not because he needed something from my boathouse, but because having the key meant having control he hadn't been given. And for Greg, that was the whole point. Patricia's board rescinded every retaliatory compliance notice within its first week. They hired an independent auditor to review HOA finances. The audit found that Greg had authorized over $14,000 in payments to Lakeview properties across his tenure, none approved by the board, none disclosed in annual reports. The new board filed a civil claim to recover the funds. Phil DeCatcher settled out of court. Greg refused to contribute. The claim against him is still pending. My boathouse still stands. Same spot, same concrete, same deadbolt. Rekeyed now, new keys, only 2 copies. I check the camera feed most mornings out of habit, but the gravel path stays empty. The lake is quiet. The door stays locked. Dana asked me once if I wished I'd handled it differently. Confronted Greg harder that first morning. Called the sheriff right away. Made a bigger scene at the board meeting. I told her no, because the thing that beat Greg wasn't anger or volume or even the evidence, though the evidence mattered. What beat him was patience, the willingness to let him keep talking, keep acting, keep believing he was the smartest person in the room, while the people he'd underestimated quietly built a case he couldn't argue his way out of. Some fights you win by swinging. This one, I won by standing still and keeping the door open just long enough for him to walk through it.